Carmen, San Diego.
Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego?
Tell me.
Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego?
Where could she be?
Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego? 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 Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego?
Could she be?
Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego? Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego?
This is Lynn Sigpin speaking for Where in the World is Carmen, San Diego. And remember, roses are red, violets are beige. Acme crime, that is all the rage.
In the world is Carmen, San Diego? Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego? Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego?
Could she be?
Where in the world is Carmen, San Diego? Where in the world?
This program was bankrolled by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
This program was brought to you by Toyota.
This is PBS.
Hi, I'm Tom Williams. Just who resolves conflicts with teens today?
Just want somebody to listen to, not an adult or something.
Is it possible to have a win-win solution to all conflicts?
What happens when you're trying to solve a conflict, but the conflict gets worse?
How did it get started, conflict management?
What problem's too serious? Discover more about this fascinating new program in our schools on Student Voices. Sunday afternoon at 3, here on Iowa Public Television.
TV worth watching brings out the stars. See the fun during Festival on Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future.
This week, Living in Iowa brings you Promises, Promises. I'm Morgan Halgren, and on this week's show, a pre-caucus look at the presidential campaign of humorist Dave Barry, who promises to appoint all living Rolling Stones to the Supreme Court. And we'll visit the Grout Museum in Waterloo, where we'll reflect upon years of presidential campaigning. Watch Living in Iowa, always something a little different, tonight at 8:30.
50 years ago, J.I. Rodale planted the seeds for what has become known as the sustainable agriculture movement in the United States.
Well, they had to convince farmers to change from what was then the conventional system to an organic system.
A look at the growing Rodale Institute on the next Market to Market.
You're watching Iowa Public Television.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And funding for the Iowa broadcast is provided by Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, since 1861, an environment for academic excellence. And by CRST, a family-owned company based in Iowa and a major truck carrier in the United States, which is proud to support the MacNeil Lehrer Newshour.
Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Roger Mudd in Washington. After our summary of today's news, Judy Woodruff reports from New Hampshire on Patrick Buchanan's Big Mo and President Bush's Slow Mo. Friday night, political analysts Gergen and Shields size up the New Hampshire primary. Dr. C. Everett Koop, the former Surgeon General, gives his recipe for changing the nation's healthcare system. And Roger Rosenblatt sends a Valentine essay.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. and viewers like you.
House Democratic tax writers closed their doors today to work out the final details of their economic recovery plan. Lobbyists and reporters crowded the hallway outside the committee's hearing room looking for any scraps and crumbs of information about what they were doing inside. Among the key provisions being debated is a $200 tax credit for each wage earner. It would be financed by a new 35% tax bracket for upper-income Americans and a 10% surtax on millionaires. Earlier in the week, the committee rejected the president's plan. Today, Mr. Bush campaigned for it at a construction site northeast of Baltimore, Maryland. He said higher taxes for the rich were unnecessary.
We don't need any tax increases. What we need to do is stimulate the economy. And every time they aim at the wealthy, you hit these guys. That's just...
There were two economic indicators released today. The nation's industrial production fell 0.9% in January. That was the third straight monthly decline. Virtually all industries showed lower output. At the same time, wholesale prices fell 0.3%. The January drop was the biggest in 10 months. Robin?
3 former Soviet republics today refused to join a military force being formed by the Commonwealth of Independent States. The dispute came at a summit of Commonwealth leaders in the Belarus capital, Minsk. Russia and 7 other republics agreed to move ahead with plans for the joint force, but Moldova, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine opted out. The rift was seen as a blow to Boris Yeltsin's efforts for unity. But a spokesman said they had agreed nuclear weapons would remain under central control. Back in Moscow, Boris Yeltsin's administration was bitterly denounced by his own vice president. Oliver Phillips of Independent Television News reports.
With his president occupied by the Commonwealth Summit in Minsk, Vice President Rutskoy took advantage of his absence to launch his bitterest attack so far on Moscow's struggling government. He labeled Yeltsin's administration criminal. A government who cannot feed its people, where school children are going hungry, where old people have to rummage through dustbins for food. That government is criminal and should be put on trial. Alexander Rutskoy is a genuine Russian hero, a veteran fighter pilot who was honored after being captured in the Afghan war. He played a crucial role in defeating last year who brought Gorbachev back to Moscow and saving President Yeltsin's career. But now he's a vice president in opposition. Last weekend he told a Congress of Russian nationalists he's unhappy about the concessions Russia's made to other Commonwealth states. He's a fierce protector of the rights of Russians abroad. Today he issued a stark warning to any state that discriminates against them. Will turn off their oil and stop all other supplies. The leaders who don't understand this will have to be educated. Yeltsin's now placed him in charge of agricultural reform, a task his opponents hope will sink him. The vice president, however, relishes the challenge.
Secretary of State Baker today made an unprecedented visit to a top-secret Russian nuclear weapons complex. The facility is located near the city of Chelyabinsk. It's one of 10 which together produced all of the former Soviet Union's nuclear weapons. Baker told scientists at the facility that the U.S. wanted to work with them on destroying their weapons and turning their skills to peaceful purposes.
The Bush administration told the Supreme Court today that Haitians who are returned to Haiti are not being persecuted. Lawyers representing the Haitians petitioned the court to stop the deportations on the grounds that the returnees were being tortured and killed. The justices set today as the deadline for the administration to refute the charge. So far, about 3,000 Haitians have been sent home and about 10,000 remain housed in tents at the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. They fled Haiti after the September overthrow of the elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. At the State Department, spokesman Richard Boucher explained the U.S. position.
The situation, as we see it, is that there is violence and persecution in Haiti. But the policy question, the choice that we're faced with, relates to the qualifications to asylum and whether people sent back might be persecuted. Political violence or unrest in a country does not automatically mean that all its citizens qualify for asylum in the United States. We're concerned when we hear allegations that people are being persecuted for trying to leave Haiti. We've increased our embassy staff to better investigate these allegations. So far, we have no evidence that returnees are being singled out for persecution. All Haitians, those who have returned and those who never left, obviously face a very difficult situation.
Congressman John Conyers, a Democrat from Michigan, said at a press conference this morning he was outraged by what he called the administration's unconscionable approach toward the Haitian refugees in this country.
Imagine the hypocrisy of denouncing the undemocratic politics of their government and then refusing to recognize those who flee as political refugees. This is more than just a question of what we do with 6,000 human beings. This is a test of what kind of an America we choose to present to the world. It's a test of our humanity and our sense of decency. Surely, in this country, we can find a place for 6 or 7 or 8,000 human beings that are willing to risk their life to come over here.
A Supreme Court ruling on the Haitian case is expected soon. In an apparent attempt to avoid sanctions, Libya said today it would hold a public hearing with the 2 men indicted in the 1988 Pan Am Flight 103 bombing. Libya has so far refused to comply with the United Nations demand to extradite the men who are believed to be Libyan agents. They're wanted by both the U.S. and Britain. Diplomats at the UN said the Security Council is prepared to approve an economic and arms embargo against Libya if it fails to surrender the men.
A new Pacific storm headed for flood-stricken Southern California today. At least 7 people have died in floods and mudslides in the region this week. Officials estimate damage at more than $20 million. More than a foot of rain has fallen on parts of Southern California since Sunday. Forecasters say they expect more this weekend.
That's it for the news summary. Now it's on to the Bush and Buchanan fight in New Hampshire, Gergen and Shields, and Dr. C. Everett Koop on medical care, and a Valentine from Roger Rosenblatt.
Tonight we conclude this week's series of conversations on the problems facing America's healthcare system. Guaranteeing access to health care and controlling spiking health care costs have become central issues in the election year debate. The Democrats and Republicans have put plans on the table, but there is no consensus on how to proceed. This week we've been asking doctors how they would fix the system. And tonight we speak with C. Everett Koop, the former Surgeon General of the United States. He joins us from San Francisco. Dr. Koop, thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here.
We've asked all the doctors this week, first of all, what most importantly is wrong with the American healthcare system?
Well, I think several things. Americans make 3 basic incompatible demands upon the healthcare system. First, they want immediate access to it. They want the highest of high-tech medicine, and they want it at a limited cost. Any 2 of these is possible at one time, but not all 3. Second, I think that Americans do not understand, or at least they fail to practice, the ethic of prevention. And we no longer can afford rehabilitative and reparative medicine and surgery when prevention would make it not necessary to use the healthcare system as much as we do. And finally, our leaders seem to frame the present crisis in terms of cost and access and quality without seeming to understand that the medical marketplace and the medical system is not a consumer marketplace. It doesn't respond the way it does to the sale of automobiles or television sets. And I think that until that basic understanding comes to our leaders, we are going to be moving down wrong pathways most of the time.
Well, with those 3 criticisms of the present system in mind, in broad terms, how would you, if you were given the task of fixing it and the power, how would you fix it?
I would move in a 3-phase way, Robin. Phase 1 would be 2 initiatives that don't touch patients at all. The first would be to reform the administrative costs of the healthcare system, now estimated to be 24 cents on every dollar. I would aim to cut that exactly in half, and if you did, you would save about $120 billion a year. You could do that, first of all, by demanding that there no longer be 1,200 insurance forms, but maybe 1, 2, or 3. That we would move very rapidly toward a system of electronic communication for the reporting of insurance claims. And I would make it simpler for people to apply for Medicaid. It's now a 38-page booklet that one has to fill out. And I would make Medicare simple enough so that I, one of its recipients, could understand it, and so that the doctors who have to fight the system would stay in it and not refuse to see Medicare patients. Then I would move on to phase 1, initiative 2, which is malpractice reform. And I would substitute for the present tort system binding arbitration. It would not eliminate court cases, but it would mean they'd have to be pretty airtight to get through. I would also get rid of pain and suffering awards, and if there were to be punitive damages, they would not go to the plaintiff, they would go to the state, where the State Board of Medical Examiners could use such monies to improve the system and take care of impaired physicians. That should be accompanied by a private sector effort for self-policing of the medical profession, which I think they are ready to do, but are hesitant to do now because there is no protection for whistleblowers. Now remember, those two things don't touch patients, and they could be initiated by Congress now. The second phase has to do with insurance. Every American would be granted basic health insurance, and notice I have not used the word national because that implies that the government pays for it all, but I will use the word universal. And that means that every insured person in the United States today, whether privately insured or through Medicare, would get that basic insurance plus whatever else he wanted. I would scrap Medicaid because it is a fraud in that it says it takes care of the poor and doesn't quite do that for half of them. And I would combine those recipients with all of the uninsured and the uninsurable into a new category of patients who have this basic health insurance. How would it be charged? Whoever can pay will pay. That means those who are on Medicare today or those who have private insurance, a portion of whatever is paid goes to this. For the rest of them, they pay what they can. If they can pay half, they pay half. If they can pay none, they pay none. You would save about $120 billion a year by getting rid of Medicaid, so that could be one of the ways of financing it. And you could use the $100 billion you save on administration to help finance it. I didn't mention what money would be saved with malpractice reform because the numbers are incalculable, but you would get rid of the practice of defensive medicine, where I think about 1/5 of everything that is done in America today on patients is done to prevent being guilty at a lawsuit someplace down the road. Then I would come to phase 3, and that has to do with a lot of finer tuning. The first thing that I would do is acquaint Americans with what outcomes research is all about. Outcomes research makes it possible to give batting averages to doctors and to hospitals so that patients have something to go by when they choose a hospital or a physician at a time of an elective procedure or an elective illness. In addition to that, I would move to have people understand what tremendous variations exist in this country. For example, why should one town in Vermont have 7% of its youngsters tonsillectomized, why a half an hour down the road, 70% of the youngsters have had tonsillectomies? I would like the American people to know that for a diagnosis, let's say, of ABC in Rochester, X number of days are consumed in a hospital, but in New Haven it's 2X, and in Boston it's 3X. That doesn't mean care is 3 times better in Boston or twice better than it is in Rochester in New Haven. The answer is that those other cities have more beds and the system responds by filling a vacuum. I would then move on to the most important part of outcomes research, and that is to make the public aware of how many options they have when they have a given diagnosis. Today, they get very legalized informed consent, usually about a managed care procedure that a given physician or surgeon wants his patient to have. But they seldom are told that they have 5 options and that each option has risks and benefits. And in actual practice, when patients are presented with such a menu of options, they tend to choose low-tech and low-cost medicine, and that saves lots of money. I think that the future of outcomes research is going to absolutely revolutionize the way medicine is practiced in this country as we make medical students, physicians, and patients aware of how little we know about how good things are that we recommend be done for patients.
Let me ask you some questions about your plan. You keep the private health insurance industry in place, the 1,500 or so companies that sell insurance now, and which are blamed by one of our earlier guests this week, Dr. Castle of Chicago, who thinks that the private health insurance industry is a big part of the problem and should be replaced with one insurer or one payer.
Well, that's because she favors a Canadian system, and that is not what we need in this country. I have never said anything nice about the health insurance industry, Robin. I have said it acts like a shell game, and it's a national disgrace. But that's because government has never told the insurance companies where to head in. And we have to tell them that instead of cherry picking and picking out of the population individuals who are high risk because they're sick, that they have to go back to the original idea of what insurance was all about, sick people and well people getting together so they can share the cost when somebody is ill.
But your plan to, as you put it, cover the present Medicare people and the present uninsured, Medicaid people, and the present uninsured and uninsurable people with your basic service, wouldn't that risk making that a kind of basic dumping ground for the high-risk people the insurance industry either dumps now or won't insure or charges so much they can't afford it?
Well, I think that it's a lot of people. It's everybody except Medicare and the 160 million people whose insurance is paid for by their employer. But I think that with proper government supervision, that could be taken care of. And if it's going to cost money, Robin, it has to cost money. You can't expect to suddenly assume the care of 37 million people that have been neglected for 3 decades and not have it cost money. But I've told you where you can find some of that money in savings on administration, savings on malpractice, and savings on changing Medicaid patients to a new system. There's more than $350 billion in what I've just said.
Superficially, your plan sounds a bit like what President Bush has proposed. How is it different from President Bush's?
Well, I think that we don't know the details of President Bush's plan because what he has said in public is a précis of a 58-page document, which I have not yet had the privilege to read. But I suspect that when we do read it and know all of the details, it will not be as inclusive or as apparently generous as it is advertised to be. But I do think that the president has struck a strong political blow because by joining the fray, so to speak, he now is out front, cannot be accused of not taking part in this debate. And while we are arguing about the pros and cons of what he has said, maybe he and his advisors can make it gel into a system that will work for America. But one of the most important things, Robin, that nobody talks about is how long it will take to get from where we are to where we should be. Suppose that everybody involved were a person of goodwill, which they are not. And suppose that all the players could agree on a plan, which they cannot. And suppose that everything went as smoothly as it could, which it will not. It would take us a decade to revise and reform the healthcare system to be what we'd like it to be.
Since we've mentioned the one-payer scheme, like the Canadian one, which you don't agree with, and we've heard what you think about President Bush's scheme, let's just mention the other one that's on the table at the moment, the congressional Democrats' pay or play. Employers either have to provide insurance or pay into a national fund to provide it for those who don't have it. What do you think of that?
I would have no real complaint about that plan, Robin, if it could be fixed in such a way so that it would not permit to happen what has already happened in places like Massachusetts, where it actually causes a fall-off in employment as small employers lose one employee in order to make up the money they need to pay for the health insurance of others. If you could build in the safeguards to prevent that kind of deterioration of the economic picture, then there's something to be said about it. But I don't see how you can really enforce those safeguards.
Whichever idea or combination of all these ideas is promoted, do you think that the political system, the Congress and the White House, now accept the need for fundamental reform, or is this just an exercise for the '92 election? What's your own feeling about it?
No, I really think that they do understand it. I think that the president would have liked to stonewall it until after the elections, but now, since Pennsylvania in November, he can't. I think Congress does understand the need. I think they are willing to move forward, but I don't think they understand the two things I mentioned, how long it is going to take and what the medical market is actually all about. It is not like selling cars. You know, when you have two gas stations on opposite corners, there will eventually be a gas war, and down will come the price of gas. But if you put two orthopedic surgeons on opposite street corners, the price of replacing a hip will go up.
Why?
And that's the way medical economics works.
Why will it go up?
It goes up because each one competes against the other to improve what's going on in the medical field, and it costs more to do so. And it is common knowledge that if you have 9 doctors in a town and a 10th one arrives, he doesn't take practice from all of the others so that they lose practice, but he adds 1/10 to the cost of medical care in that town. And that's what I meant before when I said that for utilization, medicine fills the vacuum, and we have to be sure that no vacuums exist.
If some consensus isn't arrived at quickly and progress begun immediately on getting things reformed, what are the consequences of going on the way we are for a few more years?
Well, you have two terrible alternatives, Robin. Either you will see a congressionally hastily imposed national kind of health service of some sort, which will be exorbitantly expensive and will be relatively insensitive to patient needs, or you will see private medicine run amok, and it is well on its way to going there now.
Dr. Koop, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
There are only 3 days to go before the first presidential primary of 1992. As the race comes down to the wire, we focus on politics with our Friday night regulars, Gergen and Shields. But first, we start with a look at the Republican side of the story. Judy Woodruff reports from New Hampshire, where the economy is President Bush's big problem.
President of the United States of America, George Washington.
When President Bush traveled to New Hampshire this week, he was still talking about Desert Storm, the victorious war he launched against Iraq.
With our coalition partners, we kicked Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And
a month ago, on Mr. Bush's first appearance here of this campaign, it was the anniversary of the war's start. Again and again, he brought up the Persian Gulf.
aggression was set back, and our country came together with a pride that we hadn't had since the end of World War II.
But worried campaign advisors made sure that he added another message then and now that's closer to home.
It's important to the people that are hurting that their president knows and the president cares, and in this case, the president is going to do something about it.
That message comes late, but the Bush campaign hopes not too late to sway disillusioned and angry Republican voters here, some so angry they say they regret voting for George Bush 4 years ago.
I'm not sure he feels what we feel. You know, he's sitting up in the White House. He has a comfortable bed. He's eating a steak dinner. And I'm just not sure he knows exactly what's going on. It seems like he would have done something sooner.
I don't think George Bush or the people that are advising him have an understanding of how people live on a day-to-day basis.
The day-to-day life for most New Hampshire residents is tougher and meaner than they have ever known. The recession that has left the rest of the country in pain has put New Hampshire on the critical list.
We've lost about 1 in 10 of our total jobs in New Hampshire, about half of our construction jobs, about a fifth of our manufacturing jobs just in the last 3 or 4 years. We've lost 5 of our 7 largest banks that collectively had about 1/4 of the state's banking deposits, and a lot of businesses have had to shut down because of just the lack of available credit.
The impact of all this on the people of New Hampshire has been traumatic, and the timing couldn't be worse for an incumbent Republican president asking voters in the first primary state to re-elect him.
This is a state that's got really hard times. It has shaken the confidence of the state. It has shaken the confidence of the Republican electorate. And there is, at large at the moment, in a way there was never before, an anger, a cynicism, a sense of desperation among the New Hampshire electorate that has made this a very hard race to follow and understand.
Good to see you guys.
Bush supporters here argue that as bad as things are, it's not the president's fault. Some Republican voters plainly agree.
I just feel he's given a bum rap, you know, with all the bad publicity of the economy and such. Because I think he did such a good job last year.
There are some things that I think are almost unfixable from the administration side. I heard someone comment not too long ago, George Bush didn't cause this recession, and George Bush isn't going to fix this recession any more than Franklin Roosevelt fixed the Depression. World War II fixed the Depression.
But other Republicans who also voted for Mr. Bush 4 years ago aren't so forgiving. Kathy Woods and a group of friends wanted to talk to the president when he stopped by a shopping mall outside Manchester this week, but they couldn't even get close.
People like us, even if he turns everything around and supplies 200 homes here and 20,000 jobs there, we've all lost our credit. We can't buy any homes now. We can't buy a car. We can't get our businesses started again. And we can't wait 7 years. We're going to be, you know, by then in the soup lines, because now we have no credit, and the world revolves on credit right now.
I'm in the same boat as this woman. We've lost all our credit, too, and our business, you know, so we have to start all over, you know, and I don't think that Bush really has any answers for people who were middle class at one time, but have now become the poor, the new poor of the nation.
Rochester businessman Bob Silverblatt also voted for George Bush in 1988.
I think that the president did get caught up in international affairs. I think Saddam Hussein became more important to him than what was going on in the United States economically. There are more homeless. There are more people unemployed. The unemployment rate in the state of New Hampshire is over 7%, but in certain areas, not too far from here, 10 miles up the road, it's 17%. Those people aren't out buying anything anymore. They don't go out to dinner, they don't go to movies, they don't go to their local lumber yard and buy things. So I think I'm closer to the problem. The problem is no longer in downtown or Manhattan or New York City or Washington, D.C. It's now here as well. And not to recognize it, I think you really have to have your eyes closed not to see it, or want not to see it.
This former Bush supporter from the small town of Wakefield has also changed her mind about the president.
He says he knows how we're suffering and all this and that, but does he truly? To me, it seems like he only came up here because he's got opposition from Mr. Buchanan, and now he's up here, he knows New Hampshire is here.
Indeed, Bush strategists confirmed that if television commentator Pat Buchanan hadn't entered the race, the president might well have avoided New Hampshire altogether. But Buchanan did get in early December, and he has pounded away day after day ever since at voters' unhappiness with Mr. Bush, especially with what Buchanan charges is the president's abandonment of conservative principles.
Now, my old friend Mr. Bush went to Washington, and he didn't do what he said he would do. He has become what I would call a big government Republican. Under Mr. Bush, spending went from 22% of the gross national product to 25%. It exploded faster than in any administration in recent history.
Buchanan's anti-Bush message on the stump has been reinforced by paid TV commercials.
I don't trust him, and I'll never, ever get the trust that I had for Mr. Bush when I elected him.
The Bush campaign responds that the president had no choice but to go along with the Congress on a tax increase package in 1990. New Hampshire Governor Judd Gregg.
Well, I think most people acknowledge that that was a mistake. I certainly do. I think it was a mistake.
The upshot has been to put the president and his campaign organization on the defensive, not just about higher taxes, but about Mr. Bush's late recognition of the recession's impact.
People who have been in New Hampshire before, been here 4 years ago, 8 years ago, are stunned by the totality of the reversal.
What hit the White House as a surprise has provided a right target for Pat Buchanan.
I know the pain up here. You can't miss it if you travel New Hampshire as I have for 9 weeks. And until I came up and announced my candidacy, those people in Washington behaved as if they did not care. Well, I care.
For many former Bush voters now looking for an alternative, Buchanan's message is catching on.
I think he's just down to earth. He seems to be not just promising that much, just trying to get everything back, the economy, the way it was, and, you know, just down to earth about it.
I like his stance on cutting foreign aid and spending more time on American programs.
Do you think he has a real shot at winning the presidency?
I'm not sure. I think it depends on how he does next Tuesday. If he gets more than 30%, I think it's looking better. But I think it'll definitely send a message to George Bush that he needs to pay some more attention to America.
The plea to send a message comes straight from the mouth of Pat Buchanan. It has the Bush people worried and angry at what they say is Buchanan's hypocrisy.
The President of the United States is a conservative and has done an excellent job on the conservative agenda. And then Pat Buchanan comes up here, and I find this to be fairly outrageous and almost humorous, and says, I'm attacking those folks in Washington. Here's a guy who was born in Washington, raised in Washington, went to school in Washington, earned his living in Washington. I mean, if there was ever a Beltway mentality, it's Pat Buchanan. And I find it just humorous for him to come up here and try to run in an anti-Washington establishment mode when I don't think he even knew where New Hampshire was until 3 weeks ago.
The Bush campaign also argues that Buchanan's ideologically far-right views won't sell beyond New Hampshire. But in order to prevent any further splintering of the Republican Party, Bush strategists have avoided a frontal attack on Buchanan so far. Instead, they've had the president suggest that a vote for Buchanan undermines Mr. Bush by helping to strengthen the Democrats in the Congress.
I ask for your vote to put our nation on notice that New Hampshire Republicans stand united to defeat the liberal Democrats in the fall.
Skeptics, especially those in the Buchanan organization, say the president's appeal is too little too late.
We see someone who has pushed off their announcement to the last possible day and hour in order not to capitalize on his record or to run on any kind of a principled campaign of ideas or leadership, but to simply try to throw out to the voters in New Hampshire that I am the president, you should vote for me. Now, within the Republican Party, I'm sorry, but telling the Republicans that I am your best and last hope does not make you a conservative, and it does not make you electable.
But Pat Buchanan has hurdles of his own to overcome, in particular questions about whether his views are outside the Republican mainstream.
He's certainly touched on a nerve in New Hampshire, and I give him credit for that, but I don't think he's articulated his policies sufficiently to make me have confidence in any particular course of action he would take.
But what makes Buchanan viable here are voters like Warren Clement, who say despite their misgivings, they'll vote for him anyway.
I think I'm right there, smack dab in the middle. It says I can understand that we have to take care of people who need it. But in my case, I'm going along with Pat Buchanan, and there's some things with Mr. Buchanan I have a hard time dealing with. I think the message has got to be sent to the president that we're real serious up here, and we need to have someone help us out of the problem.
The president also has going for him control over federal monies that have been targeted in recent days into New Hampshire. University of New Hampshire political science professor David Moore.
President Bush has already put a great deal of money into the state that we probably wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Over $200 million in Medicaid funds to help us deal with our budget, which is a very serious problem. Indeed, now for this year, the budget problem has apparently gone away, and it's without that extra money that we got from the federal government, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
What both campaigns, as well as the Democrats, are most focused on in these closing days are the undecided voters, many of them registered independent, and therefore able to vote next Tuesday in either the Republican or the Democratic primary. A contest for the anti-Bush vote has sprung up between Buchanan on the one hand and each of the 5 Democrats, or a write-in vote for Mario Cuomo on the other. Many voters seem genuinely conflicted about which way to go. Jane Wood is a Republican from Laconia who considered voting for Buchanan, but
But then I thought, well, how is a person to know what's a pro-Buchanan vote and what's an anti-Bush vote? And even though some of Patrick Buchanan's conservative ideas, some of them I like, he really is not the answer for leading the country in my view. And so I've pretty much decided that I will write in Bill Clinton and hope that a number of other people write in the candidate of their choice so that it's clearer how people are thinking.
Art Nicholas is a businessman and registered Democrat from Rochester who has always voted Republican. He's toyed with writing in Mario Cuomo's name, but then again...
Yeah, that's the reason why I like Pat Buchanan, because, you know, I'm looking for someone who really jumps out at me and says, hey, this is what this country needs. And although some of the other candidates may be saying these things, I don't think they're getting their message across or have the ability to.
None of this bodes well for President Bush, whose campaign is also worried about Republican voters who simply stay home.
How much are they saying, I've listened to this before, I've played this game before, I've gotten involved before, and look where it's gotten us. And they wash their hands of it and they stay home. That's a real problem. That's a big problem for the Bush campaign, and it's one that we're trying to deal with, because every one of those Bush voters who stays home becomes a vote for Pat Buchanan.
Now for some political analysis of the week just passed and a look forward to a weekend blizzard of political activity before New Hampshire votes, we have Gergen and Shields. David Gergen is editor-at-large of U.S. News and World Report. Mark Shields is a syndicated columnist, and tonight he joins us from Merrimack, New Hampshire. Let's begin, Mark and David, with the Republicans. The latest Boston Globe poll, WBZ poll, has Bush at 50 and Pat Buchanan at 33. A week ago, it was Bush 58, Buchanan 28. What do you make of those numbers, David?
Well, the president has been slipping here in the last few days, and particularly among male voters. That's what the polls are picking up, and a lot of those are the kind of people we just saw on Judy's show who do want to send a message. Buchanan was not gaining early in the week, but in the last couple of days he has started to gain. Now, as Mark, I think, will attest, New Hampshire is an extraordinarily volatile state. What happens in the last 72 hours often is the determinative factors. I think any person sitting here tonight can't say with confidence what's going to happen, but it does seem Buchanan is closing the gap. If he goes over 35%, I think that a lot of folks who are watching politics from the outside, people like us, are going to say he really stung the president, he really bled the president.
Mark, the president has now added another day to his campaigning in New Hampshire. Do you think he's in any kind of serious trouble? Does he have a problem or not?
I think he has a serious problem. Look at it this way, Roger. Last time George Bush's name was on the ballot in New Hampshire was November of 1988. He got 92% of the Republican vote. This is a man who is known by 100% of the Republicans in New Hampshire. And yet, in the Boston Globe poll, 50% say they're voting for him. I don't care if you say 58%. They aren't undecided about George Bush. They're undecided about Pat Buchanan, that's all. And I think that's the problem that George Bush has. I don't care if he's at 58, 57, 55, or wherever. He's facing a serious challenge next Tuesday.
So what is a vote for Buchanan a protest vote or an ideological vote?
I think the vote for Buchanan is a complicated vote that reflects what can only be described as a sense in New Hampshire and I think abroad in the country, but particularly acute here, that those people in Washington, Republicans in the White House, Democrats in the Congress, are more interested in blame shifting, in finger pointing, than they are in solving the problems of real people. This past week, we saw a perfect example of it. One of the president's top advisors said that the State of the Union speech was just for New Hampshire. And then they put together kind of a little different package to send up to the Ways and Means Committee. And what do the Democrats say? The Ways and Means Committee chairman announces that when we pass our bill, we'll get 92nd percentile favorability is what we'll get in the public opinion polls. There's no sense that, hey, there's pain, there's suffering, there's really human hurt up here. They're not addressing that. They're playing political games.
David,
and that's what Pat Buchanan's touching.
Suppose, David, that Pat Buchanan breaks this magic number of 35%. He gets 40%. What happens to him after New Hampshire?
Well, let me go back to the original question, just to disagree with Mark. I think it's very clear that Pat Buchanan's candidacy represents a protest by people who are hurting. And I don't think there's very much that's ideological about it. I think the problem with the Buchanan campaign is that he has been all negative. He has not offered, or at least a positive program has not come through in his advertising, the message he's delivering. I think that's going to hold his vote down some. I don't think the president's in as much trouble as Mark thinks. I think the president, if he comes through at 60%, well, people will regard that as a fairly sizable vote. Now, where does Buchanan go if he does get more? He clearly has a limited candidacy, but he can continue to score some heavy damage against the president in selected states. For example, the state of Georgia. That's one of the next states, comes up on March 3rd. Buchanan is going to go to Georgia as soon as New Hampshire is over and we campaign there. He's got a shot in Georgia. He is also trying to campaign in Maryland. I think that's a tougher go for him.
The last question about the Republicans. If Buchanan scores 40%, that's a message to Bush. What does Bush do with the message?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, because he has to, the message is get the economy back on track and come up with a program. And of course, the president thinks he's done everything he can to do that. I think what you're going to see is panic in the White House rather than some sort of response. I think they're already concerned enough, as you say, to put another extra day of campaigning into New Hampshire. I don't know what they do at that point, Roger. I wouldn't be surprised if some heads roll in Washington as a response to that.
You got a comment on that question, Mark? What happens if Buchanan gets 40%?
If Pat Buchanan gets 40%, it is a political earthquake, Roger. There's no doubt about it. This has been a campaigning president. This is not like 1968 when Lyndon Johnson pretended that it was a non-event up here. George Bush is campaigning like he's running for sheriff. If he gets 40% here, I think he best heed the advice given on this program several weeks ago by David Gergen, and that was that he pick a single issue, stick with it, follow it through. People question this flighting and jumping from issue to issue.
Okay, let's turn to the Democrats. The same Boston Globe WBZ poll gives Paul Tsongas 32%, Governor Clinton 24%, Senator Harkin 12%, Senator Kerry 9%, Jerry Brown 4%. Just a week ago, Clinton was leading the field with 28%. The change, of course, is traceable, I think, to the publicity about what Clinton calls a woman I never slept with and a draft I never dodged. Take a look now at the comments about Clinton's troubles from Clinton's rivals, followed by Clinton's comments from his paid broadcast last night.
I am not advantaged by diversions, and I'm not saying this is a diversion, but I need to stick to my message, and I'm not going to spend my time talking about other candidates. There's no advantage to me in doing that.
It looks like it may come down to me and Mr. Tsongas.
Bob Kerry, a decorated war veteran. No one can question his patriotism.
If you say I'm electable on Tuesday, by definition, I'm electable. And I've been in 17 campaigns in 17 years. I've had very, very tough negative ad campaigns, very, very tough hit jobs done. I've always been able to come out of it when I stood up to it, fought it, and worked it through.
Mark, let's take the Democrats then one by one. Let's go with Clinton. You think he can pull it out or not?
I'd say as of now, no, Roger. But we said earlier, you know, we're down the last 72 hours. We're going into a big debate on Sunday. The thing is very volatile and it's very fluid. But I would have to say right now that Paul Tsongas is riding a wave. And I don't see him getting off that wave right now, but obviously anything could happen between now and then. But I'd have to bet on Tsongas.
For Clinton, is finishing a tight second so bad?
No, I don't think finishing a tight second is so bad. What Clinton's rise was predicated upon was his electability. He was attractive. He was an outsider. He could run against Washington. He was attractive, appealing, bright, and all of those things. But the questions here are going to continue to dog him. It isn't a question about Bill Clinton's patriotism. I think some people have sprung to his defense, and I ran into two commanders, one of the VFW and one of the Legion, State Legion from Arkansas up here, campaigning for him. It isn't a question of that. It's a question of the candor, whether in fact he was being absolutely straightforward. Last week he was saying that the reason he wanted to go in the draft was that 4 of his high school classmates had died in Vietnam. That was quite moving. And yet, in the letter, as he explains it, that didn't really come into play the same way, the letter that he wrote 23 years ago. So he was playing defense all week, and you can't score points on defense generally in politics. And I think if he gets out of here with a close second, he will feel he's dodged the bullet.
How about Paul Tsongas now? From the pictures I see in the swimming pool, it's more an aquacade than a motorcade. Huh? So tell me about Tsongas. What do you think, David?
Well, I was in New Hampshire earlier this week, and my sense, Roger, is that a lot of folks were moving from Clinton to Tsongas because, in effect, they had liked Clinton earlier, but they're beginning to say, I'm not sure I know the fellow. I'm not sure I can trust him, and they feel they trust Tsongas. They feel there's something real there. He's not charismatic. He's almost anti-charismatic, sort of the Walter Matthau of this campaign. But there's something about him which was reassuring to people, and they say that they feel he's solid. So I agree with Mark. I think that at the moment, I would have to say Tsongas, I think, will win handily.
You think there's life after New Hampshire for Tsongas?
I do think there's life after New Hampshire. I tell you, I went to New Hampshire believing that Tsongas didn't have much of a prayer for the Democratic nomination. I came back after seeing him and seeing his campaign and talking to people there, thinking we have to take this man a lot more seriously. If he wins New Hampshire, he deserves to be taken very seriously. He is the one candidate, far more than the others in the Democratic race, and indeed far more than the incumbent at the White House, who is talking seriously about America's big challenges ahead. He is not talking incremental change. He's talking massive, sweeping change. And very importantly, Roger, he is challenging the liberal orthodoxy of his party in the economic field. He is saying, essentially, I'm pro-business and pro-growth, and that's something no other Democrat is saying.
How about Harkin, Mark? Did his Iowa victory help him?
Sure. Could I just say one thing on Tsongas, and that is he has touched, Roger, the very same thing up here that Pat Buchanan has, in the sense that he is, by any definition, obviously he's running against George Bush, which establishes his bona fides as running against the Republicans in the White House and the split-level government in Washington. But he's also, as David pointed out, the furthest removed from sort of the Democratic governing establishment in Washington. And I think that works to his advantage. I think he is a safe vote. It is not a national campaign. I don't know if the campaign does have legs beyond New Hampshire. Paul Tsongas' definition of South is probably Annapolis, Maryland. I don't know if that goes much below the Mason-Dixon line, quite frankly. So as far as Tom Harkin is without a doubt the antithesis of Dale Carnegie in this campaign. He has set out to alienate his fellow Democrats. He's been as tough on any of them. He pronounced Bill Clinton dead. He announced it was a race between himself and Paul Tsongas, that Clinton was gone. He didn't get much of a bump out of Iowa in the polls. He got a slight lift. I mean, if he could finish second here, obviously he's viable. And if Clinton finished third, he wouldn't be. So, you know, we're talking about place and show and all that sort of thing. But I would have to say right now that the Harkin message has not yet captivated the New Hampshire voters.
We've got about a minute, and I don't want to ignore the others. Kerry, I guess, still hasn't found his voice, has he?
He has not found his voice. Harkin has. He's qualifying as the jerk of the campaign.
Who's the jerk?
Harkin. The question becomes whether who finishes third. The man who finishes third, Harkin or Kerry, is the man who would go forward and go out of New Hampshire with legs.
So what about
the other question was Cuomo and Cuomo?
Could he finish a write-in for Cuomo be third?
A write-in for Cuomo could go into double digits and then would be taken very seriously. If he gets over 10%, he'll be taken seriously. I'd be interested in what Mark has been up there more recently and where he feels.
You got the last word on Cuomo, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, well, Cuomo, I mean, this is the ultimate tease, okay? But Bob Kerry, it's fascinating to me. Half the Democrats up here talk about electability as being crucial to them, as being of overwhelming importance. Democrats in New Hampshire are strenuously anti-Bush for some particular reason, more so than other parts of the country. And yet Kerry, who seemingly has a strong case to be made for electability, it just hasn't made a connection yet. I really can't explain it.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mark. Mark Shields in New Hampshire and David Gergen in Washington.
Thank you.
We close tonight with a Valentine's Day message. It's from essayist and playwright Roger Rosenblatt, editor-at-large for Life magazine.
I don't know much about love, but I know what I like. I like romantic cliches in movies. Lovers rushing to meet each other in a special place. Will they make it? Will one of them be too late? Lovers parting on a train, and as the train pulls out and their hands are extended toward each other, your heart is about to burst.
1 out. No, 1 strike. That's a strike. He gets 2 more of those before he's out.
Why?
Well, because are you kidding?
I especially like witty scenes between witty men and women who you just know are going to go gaga over each other just as soon as their brittle wit falls away and they are left with a sweet surprise of mutual recognition. Terrific scenes. Tracy and Hepburn, Gable and Colbert, Powell and Loy. One of the most touching moments in It's a Wonderful Life is when Jimmy Stewart realizes that he's hooked to Donna Reed forever because he's shouting at her.
Now you listen to me. I don't want any plastics, I don't want any ground floors, and I don't want to get married ever to anyone. You understand that? I want to do what I want to do. And you're...
George.
I like them all. Or scenes of great heaving passions in novels and operas. I like them too. Anna Karenina throbbing all over Russia for Count Vronsky, who throbs for her. And as long as we're in Russia, was there ever such anguish as Dr. Zhivago's? Maybe Tristram and Isolde's. That was fine stuff. Or Catherine and Heathcliff. You'd be hard-pressed to top those two. Unless you watched Romeo Long for Juliet, or The Great Gatsby for Daisy Buchanan, or Jane Eyre for Rochester. For pure pathos, pure heartbreaking pathos, take me back to the movies and the final scene in City Lights, where Charlie Chaplin smiles hopelessly at the girl he saved from blindness, but cannot love. I don't know much about love, but I like that scene. And I like Valentine's Day because it celebrates love. A day of chocolates and flowers and sentimental cards. Flimsy stuff, I suppose, in a substantial world, yet a mighty nice respite from the harsh news of the Mike Tyson trial and the hardness of life in no longer romantic Russia. Japan bashes and is bashed. The economy goes down, down, down. But somewhere in the country, lots of places really, the hopes of some young suitor go up, up, up as he picks out a most particular rose. And it matters not a whit to him that Macy's is going to the dogs, you see, because the most beautiful, the most astonishingly miraculous girl in the world smiled at him for the first time last Tuesday. So what's the harm in sending her a little rose? I mean, what can he lose?
The way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea.
I don't know much about love, but I like the songs about love, especially when they're sung by Ella or Frank or Sarah or Barbara. All over America, their voices rise from radios, CDs, and tapes, in taxis and restaurants, a kind of backup music to the national romantic streak. For me, almost any old song will do. Time after time, I like that song.
Time after time, I tell myself that I'm so lucky to be loving you.
Time after time I have listened to it as the years piled up, and I did not learn a lot about love, but I know what I like. The entire subject is okay by me, though I confess that I always forget the date of Valentine's Day. Most years I forget the day exists. Unlike my wife, Ginny, who never forgets Valentine's Day, or our anniversary, or anybody's birthday, and who always remembers to say the kind word and do the kind thing, and is warm and smart and just plain lovely, time after time. Which is why I wrote this flimsy, unsubstantial essay, to show her that I, too, could remember Valentine's Day if I concentrated on it. I don't know much about love, but I love my wife. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Roger Rosenblatt.
Again, the main stories of this Friday. Late today, Democrats announced their version of a tax plan. Among other things, it includes a $200 credit for most workers. It would be financed by higher taxes on upper-income Americans. The government said both industrial production and wholesale prices fell in January. And tonight, warring factions from the African nation of Somalia agreed to a ceasefire in their bloody war. They did it at the United Nations in New York. More than 20,000 civilians have been killed or wounded since the fighting began last November. Good night, Roger.
Good night, Robin. We'll be back Monday night with Judy Woodruff's report on how the Democrats are running in the New Hampshire primary home stretch. I'm Roger Mudd. Have a fine weekend.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer Newshour has been provided by PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Stay tuned for the series that gives you sound advice and new ideas about home improvement. Join Steve Thomas as he continues to explore traditional building methods on This Old House, next on Iowa Public Television.
Video cassettes of the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1. This is PBS.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And funding for the Iowa broadcast is provided by Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, since 1861, an environment for academic excellence. And by CRST, a family-owned company based in Iowa and a major truck carrier in the United States, which is proud to support the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour.
You're viewing Iowa Public Television, where each Friday you can review the week in Washington, on Wall Street, and in agribusiness. Look at life in Iowa and enjoy music from Austin's city limits.
50 years ago, J.I. Rodale planted the seeds for what has become known as the sustainable agriculture movement in the United States.